The last couple of weeks on Tabletop Thursday, I showed you how to basically paint a mini, how to do a real quick paint job on it, but this week I wanted to show you some of the tools that we can get that help us paint our minis even better. Hey fellow Game Masters, I'm Richard Quiner, and welcome back to the Daily D20, your daily dose of all things tabletop role-playing games, helping you build your world and master your game. If you like what you see here on the channel, I invite you to hit the subscribe button so you get notified when I get new videos uploaded every day. Now, as I did mention briefly, painting miniatures is quite a rabbit hole to go down, and I don't recommend it for everybody, but if you are inclined to get into the art of painting miniatures, these are some of the basic tools you're gonna need. Of course, first up is the primers. When you have your miniatures, you need to prime them so the paint will stick to the mini. Now, primer comes in a couple different types, mainly spray and paint on. If you go with the spray route, there's a couple things you need to know is that it's a little harder to get a nice smooth even coat on it, because in my experience, sprays have more of a tendency, you can get a little thick if you do it wrong. Maybe I'm just bad at it, that's very possible also. But the other thing with spray primers is they don't really work as well in cold conditions. They work best in moderate temperatures, so they can spray out of the can as a nice even layer, and you can get your miniatures covered well. If you decide to go with a paint-on primer, which is what I use, it is more time consuming, but you do have a little more control. It just takes more time, and it does give you a nice thin layer, and you can use it indoors. You don't have to go outside and have moderate temperatures to use a brush-on primer. The thing I do with my brush-on primer, though, is use an airbrush. Now, an airbrush is expensive. We'll talk about those in a little bit, but that basically gives you the best of both worlds. You can use your brush-on primer indoors in any weather, and you can get a good, clean coverage, better than a spray can even, I think, and it just is a lot faster. It's not as slow as a brush. When you're dealing with paints, there are a lot of different options for you. There are plenty of companies that make paints that are targeted specifically for miniature painting, but you don't have to buy these in order to do it. But if you want to look at these, a couple of the main brands are, number one is Citadel. They have like a billion colors out there. Citadel paints are sold by Games Workshop, which is the company that makes Warhammer 40K and Warhammer Age of Sigmar and other war games like that. So they put a lot of time and money and effort into making their paints. They have, like I said, a billion colors, but they are more expensive. Another company that's out there is Vallejo. They make some model paints of different ranges of colors. They don't necessarily focus on wargaming per se or role-playing games per se, but they do just model paints. So you have a lot of variety of colors, from old military colors to the newer, more sci-fi kind of looking things, but you can get a broad range of colors there as well, and it's kind of an average, middle-of-the-road price point. The paints I kind of fell in love with are the Master Series paints. They have this thing called a HD or a high pigment. It's just nicer paints apparently, but the price point was really good for what I was looking for. They came in several packs of about 30 paints in a pack, so I got a large variety of colors for a relatively cheap price, and I'm still working through them. I haven't made a real dent on them yet, but those are the ones that I ended up settling with. And I'll leave a bunch of links in the description so you can see what options are out there and see the price points that you're looking at for all of them. You're going to need a palette or just something to put your paints on. Like I'd said in another video, you could use just like a plastic plate or a foam plate, something like that. You could also go out to a store like Michael's and buy some plastic palettes. They're the type with the little divots in them. If I'm teaching people how to paint, I like to use those because I get a whole bundle and I can give each one their own and they can just go nuts with their palettes. These are really good, but the downside of them is you do end up wasting a lot of paint because you're just painting a miniature. It doesn't take a whole lot to paint them. The solution to that problem was created with the wet palette. The wet palette is kind of the granddaddy of palettes, and it's an object that's designed to keep your paints moist for a long period of time. If you set up a wet palette properly, you can put your paint on it, seal the thing up, and keep it for days or weeks without the paints drying up, which means you don't waste the paints that you've put on your palette. You're able to go back and get the same color and the same pigment paint every time you go back, which also means if you want to mix your paints to get a specific color, you can do that easier without having to try and get the same mix over and over again. It's a much easier process. I am still learning how to use a wet palette the best. I do like it, but I feel like I'm missing something in that, but it's still very cool, and I highly recommend it if you are trying to become a really good painter. For brushes, when you're just starting out, like I mentioned, you don't need to dive in and get a whole bunch of really nice expensive brushes. There are brushes that range from like $2 for a brush all the way up to $30 or $40 or $50 a brush. You don't need the high-end brushes when you're just starting out. Save that for when you want to be a pro and be in the competitions. Save it for that. I recommend you get a couple round brushes, maybe in the sizes of 1 and 3. 1 is pretty small and get all the small detail spots. 3 is big enough that you can still get enough paint on there to get some good coverage. I think those are really good sizes. And of course you want a flat brush for doing your dry brushing. If you can get those 3 brushes, you're gonna be set up pretty good. But if you go to the hobby stores, you're most likely gonna find kits that sell about 5 or 6 brushes in them for pretty cheap. I think it's like $8 and I got 8 paintbrushes for it. So look for those first and then save your money for when if you ever decide to upgrade your brushes. The next step above the cheap brushes are ones that are natural bristles. So they're hairs of some animals, and you can get those for a little bit more. Just a side note I want to mention about brushes is you have to take care of your brushes. First off, when you're using them, don't get any paint in the ferrule. That's the metal ring that's kind of wrapped around the brush and holds the bristles in place. If you get the paint in there, you're gonna mess up the pattern of your bristles and it's gonna mess up your paint jobs. You can clean it out, but it's better to just avoid getting the paint in there. You do want to get a hold of some brush soap. It doesn't cost a whole lot and it can extend the life of your brushes by a long time if you just take care of your brushes and clean them up every time you use them. And one other mistake that I've seen people do or seen people ask about, and sometimes when you're painting with these small brushes, you're gonna find there's kind of a bristle that sticks out the front and it seems annoying and it seems unneeded, but don't go trimming it off. Resist all urge to trim off that one bristle, because I did that when I first started and it ruins brushes. So keep the bristles there. Don't go cutting any part of the brush off. They were made that way, just let them be. The next up on my list of tools to paint minis is ways to hold on to the mini. Sure, you could just grab onto the base of the mini and hold it in your hand, but it's not very efficient and it kind of gives you more of a chance of getting your fingerprints or smudging the paint that you're working on. What most people do is have some sort of stand, and you can do this just as easy as getting maybe a soda bottle top or something like that and get a little sticky tack and put the sticky tack on the base of the mini and push that onto the soda bottle cap, and then you can just hold on to that soda bottle cap as you're painting the mini, and then you're not touching the actual figurine. Citadel does make some handles. I really enjoy my handle because it doesn't use any sticky tack. It just kind of clamps onto the base of the mini, and I just think that works out really well for me. But you got to find something that works for you. You could use medicine bottles, you could use, like I said, soda bottle caps, you could use pretty much anything as long as you can hold it in your hand and not touch your mini. Then a couple other things that I like to keep on board in case I need it. I have a little magnifier which I use. I can clamp a mini on there and I can paint on that, or I can just hold it on the other side of the magnifying glass. It works well in some cases for getting the really small details when I have a hard time seeing it, but it is a little awkward to use because I gotta like crouch down and get in there and see it. But it's useful to have on occasion. I also like to use latex gloves so I don't get putting paint all over my hands. It's just more of a cleanliness thing that I like to have. Not really vital because it's just water-based paints that'll wash right off with some soap and water. There's this other liquid that I also like to use. It's called Flow Improver. And what it does basically, you put that in some water and you mix that in with your paints instead of just straight water, and it keeps the paint from drying too quickly, which gives you more time to move the paint around. If you're trying to do some nice blending of different shades, you can do that a little easier because the paint's not drying as fast. Is this necessary? No, but I'm working on learning how to use it better, so that's why I have it. And last is the most expensive tool that's not necessary for painting minis is the airbrush. Like I said before, the airbrush, you can get it and you can really prime your minis really well because it gives a nice even flow once you learn how to use it. You can also do some really cool painting tricks, but the downside of it is you need the airbrush, you need to have an air compressor with a hose to attach to the airbrush, and you need to have a kind of a respirator thing because you're basically blasting molecules of paint into the air and you don't want to be inhaling that stuff into your lungs. It can really mess with you. So keep that in mind. If you do decide that you want to look into airbrushing, you'll need all that stuff, and sometimes the return might not be great for that investment. So just keep that in mind. That is all the tools you might ever need from painting miniatures. I think there are others, but I don't know them all. I'm still learning myself. So the question of today for you is, what do you want to know about painting miniatures or tabletop gaming in general? What arts and crafts do you want to know more about? Because I think I can figure something out. I'm just looking for suggestions to try to make this channel a little more better for what you are looking for. Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, I of course ask you to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you get notified when the new videos go uploaded every day. And as always, Game Masters, I've been Richard Quiner. Thank you for watching.